Magnus Carlsen's genius was clear from a very young age. Even at 12, you could tell that he was going to be a truly phenomenal chess player. And this amazing game was played at the age of 12, Magnus Carlsen, in 2003. His opponent was Hans Harstad. Magnus was actually already rated 2385 at this point. His opponent, a FIDE master, was rated at 2249. This was at the 25th Politiken Cup. Magnus had the white pieces. His opponent had black. Let's jump right in. Magnus plays e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5. We have Spanish on the board, a6. And here you'll notice at this age he's playing the critical mainline theory. Today, of course, he's always playing sidelines, it seems, but b5, bishop to b3, bishop e7, rook e1, d6, very much mainline theory. c3, of course, to support a potential advance and maybe tuck the bishop away at c2. Castles, h3 to keep a piece out of g4 and maybe expand with g4 himself later. Knight to a5 hits the bishop, which tucks back into c2. c5 to gain space, and d4. And you see black has space, but these pawns can become vulnerable to potential attacks from white. Queen to c7, knight b to d2. Of course, the normal traveling path for that knight is to go to f1 and then pop up at g3. Knight to c6, recentering the knight. You don't want to leave it on a5 forever. It'll be out of play. But Magnus immediately plays d5, gaining space in the center and hitting the knight with tempo. It will be a mistake for black to play knight to a5 here, because then white can just play b3, taking away the c4 square, and this knight is sort of stuck offside on the board. So his opponent Harstad here plays the knight to d8, but it is a passive square. Black is going to have to arrange to play f6 and then try to reroute the knight to f7. a4. Magnus immediately attacks this structure on the queen side. You can see there's a potential pin on the a file. Black can play b4, but then knight to c4 could be played. This is a sensitive square. And then after a5, even a move like knight to f takes e5 is possible, because a pawn takes knight d6, forking the queen and bishop. You don't actually win material, but white gets a much, much stronger position in that case. And if black plays rook to b8, you just take on b5, and now white has gained control of the a file. So instead, black plays the move rook to a7, the rook being defended by the queen. It is a little awkward on this square. It can be vulnerable to a bishop on a3, and it can interfere with the minor pieces, but it avoids the other problems we looked at. Knight to f1, beginning that journey to g3. g6, one of the ideas is to play rook to e8, then bishop f8, g7. This also keeps a knight out of f5 in the future. Magnus immediately plays bishop to h6, attacking the rook on f8. The rook moves over. And now knight to g3. One of white's main strategies here is to play the knight to h2 and then play f4 to open up lines of attack on the king side. Now, at the moment, this knight on g3 looks like it has nowhere to go, but we will see as the game progresses that this knight does have quite a bit of potential on this square. The knight goes to d7 to clear the way for f6, knight f7. Knight to h2, beginning that process, unblocking the f-pawn. f6, now bishop to f3. If Magnus played f4 here, then after knight to f7, defending e5, attacking the bishop on h6, black would be in a very good shape. So the bishop retreats first to e3. It also puts some indirect pressure on the rook at a7. Maybe b4 could be played to loosen that diagonal up. The knight goes to b6, hitting the pawn at a4 and the square c4. Pawn takes, and here bishop to d3 was played. Another good idea for Magnus would be to just exchange the rooks and then play h4 and immediately begin to attack black's king in that way. But he plays bishop to d3, attacking the b5 pawn. Bishop to d7. His opponent defends the pawn. Now queen to d2. He would love to get his queen and bishop in on those kingside dark squares. The knight goes to f7 to help defend those squares. The rooks are exchanged, and now queen to e2. Now he's attacking b5 with the queen and the bishop, and it's only defended once by the bishop at d7. So Harstad plays queen to a6 to defend this pawn. But here's one of the problems. White has all these potential attacking pieces and maneuvers on the king side, and this queen is stuck all the way over here at a6, and you get the feeling Magnus might strike very soon. The knight goes to g4. Obviously, you can pop into h6 at some point, put some pressure on the f6 square. King to g7 to help defend those dark squared weaknesses. And now the bishop goes back to c1. You get the impression that he wants to maybe lead with the queen and play the knight to h6, then plant the queen somewhere on maybe the h6 square. The knight goes to a4. Bishop goes to c2, and now rook to a8. So far, black has played fairly well, and he's got good control over the queen side, excuse me. He can play the move c4, the knight can maneuver to c5, and maybe d3 or b3. So black has some play, but he has to always be prepared for a kingside attack. And one thing about Magnus at 12 years old, he was very much an attacking player, much more aggressive attacking player than even we see today. I mean, he could play like this, but he usually chooses a more positional path. Queen to e3, now c4, opening up the possibility of the knight moving to c5 and then again planting itself on b3 or d3. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button for future videos. So now Magnus plays the rook to f1. The idea, of course, is to support an f4 push, and then when pawns are exchanged, that rook will be on an open file. A very dangerous threat. Now, the best move for black, it's a bit debatable, but probably a move like bishop takes knight is a strong move. The reason being that he wants to remove one of White's attacking pieces. He goes ahead and plays knight to c5, pursuing the strategy we just discussed of the knight hopping in to one of these weak light squares. The problem is now he's delayed the defense of his king side a little too long, and Magnus strikes. First, he plays the knight to h6, and here's the threat. Knight takes f7, king f7, f4. Not only opening the f-file, but aiming directly at the black king. So to avoid that, black plays the knight to g5, trying to clog things up, blocking the queen and bishop's access to the knight on h6, but he plays f4 anyway, opening up those lines. Now in this position, if black takes the knight with the king, then pawn takes knight, pawn takes, and then this unbelievably strong move would come, rook to f7, taking away all of this king's flight squares and attacking the bishop on e7. If the rook defends, then you play the exchange sack, rook takes, and then queen takes g5 check. And White would just win an entire piece and would be completely winning in that case. So the knight on h6 is poisoned and cannot be taken. ef4, queen takes f4. Now here, if king takes knight, h4, attacking the pinned knight on g5, and black's position would collapse. So instead he plays a move that's a little cute. Bishop takes h3. And of course, if gh3, then knight to h3 check would fork the king and queen, and black would just win. Magnus would not fall for that at any age, probably. Certainly not at this point in his career. So he ignores the bishop and plays the queen to h4. The bishop retreats. Now here we see the unleashing. Here we see the unbelievable attack. What's one move that makes sure that White can unleash every single piece into the attack? And that's exactly right. He plays the move e5. That opens up, look at every single white piece is involved in the attack on black's king. This reminds me of Kasparov, in fact, the way he used to play chess. He played e5 in the Spanish many times to devastate his opponent. He takes with the d-pawn, which is necessary. And now here comes another shock, another just bolt from the blue, knight to h5 check. An amazing shot. And if black just moves the king, let's say king to h8, then bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and then queen to g3, threatening queen takes e5 check. The queen can't defend because of knight to f7, forking the king and queen. And if the bishop defends, he takes the g5 pawn instead, and queen to f6 would be curtains. If instead black plays king to f8, then bishop to g5 simply wins because there's a pin on the f-pawn. So he goes ahead and takes the knight on h5, gh5, and now here is another spectacular tactical shot. Do you see white's next move? It's a queen sacrifice. Boom, queen takes g5, check. Pawn takes queen, rook to f7 check, and that's it. And in the game, his opponent took the knight, and then rook takes h7 was checkmate. By the way, if he goes to h8, rook h7 is still mate. Either way. So young Magnus, you could already see his genius. He was quite the attacker. Now, even after going over this great game from Magnus Carlsen, there's still some great chess you're missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the key game you're going to want to see is in this video right here. So be sure to watch that next for some mind-blowing chess. Goodbye.